Drugs surge through the Beatles' story, from their use of speed in Hamburg to the lysergic revolution we get with Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. This is going to get trippy. LSD loomed large over the Beatles' landscape from 1965 onwards. Rubber Soul, of course, had been dubbed the Cannabis album, whereas Revolver had been affectionately named the LSD album. As Joe Gooden states in his excellent book Riding So High, those illicit chemicals helped change the music, the personalities, the style and the beliefs of this iconic band. Let's not forget what John Lennon said to Hunter Davis, the Beatles biographer, in 1967. Drugs probably helped the understanding of myself better. It was in 1965 when the drug truly entered the worlds of Lennon and Harrison, who took their first hit under the tutelage of John Riley, known as the Demon Dentist, as Riley handed out coffee that had been secretly laced with LSD. Harrison later referred to it as the dental experience, which certainly went beyond yanking a couple of molars.
When we took the notorious wonder drug LSD, and it was given, we were having dinner with our dentist, and he put it in our coffee and never told us.
John Riley had a private practice on London's Harley Street and rubbed shoulders and gums with the movers and shakers of 60s London. Harrison later suggested that Riley's LSD had come directly from Timothy Leary, that high priest of psychedelia, flying around the world on his astral plane, no doubt. Leary was a psychology lecturer at Harvard University and was first introduced to the drug in 1961 by another psychedelic evangelist of the age, that is Michael Hollingshead. Hollingshead opened the World Psychedelic Centre, the WPC, in London's Belgravia district, and encouraged some high-profile figures to tune in and drop out, namely Keith Richards, Charles Mingus, William Burroughs, Roman Polanski, Donovan and Eric Clapton. McCartney visited the WPC and was accompanied by John Dunbar, who was the co-founder of the Indica Gallery and Bookshop. Lennon was enamoured with the psychedelic experience, as Cynthia Lennon's book testifies. She often states how she felt increasingly alienated by her husband's excursions, shall we say. But for Harrison, the use of the drug proved most profound. It gave him a glimpse of enlightenment beyond his Western ways of thinking. The first time I had acid, a light bulb went on in my head, and I began to realisations were not simply, I think I'll do this, or I think that must be because of that. The question and answer disappeared into each other, and illumination goes on inside. In 10 minutes I lived 1,000 years. My brain and my consciousness and my awareness were pushed so far out. The only way I could begin to describe it was like an astronaut on the moon or in his spaceship. Looking back at the Earth, I was looking back to the Earth from my awareness. Harrison continued to maintain that LSD had provided a lift to a higher state of consciousness, and these ideas seeped into the music he was writing. In April 1965, just days after the dental experience, Lennon wrote Help, of course, from the Beatles' fifth album, and we get that Huxleyan claim in this track, I've opened all the doors. And I realise I might be reaching a bit here, but nevertheless it's a song that deals with the pressures of fame, confusion, insecurity, as well as the things he was experiencing with taking of LSD. This also marked a shift in the band's working practices. Lennon and McCartney weren't writing together the way they used to. Lennon starts to take a back seat, really. McCartney becomes very much the dominant figure within this band, certainly creatively. But I think it's fair to say that at this time McCartney, Lennon and Harrison are kind of stepping out of their usual roles within this band to experiment with new musical forms, techniques and instruments. To quote Joe Gooden's book Riding So High, while it is quite possible that this musical odyssey from beat group to studio pioneers might have been completed without LSD, it would inevitably have sounded quite different. Acid played a central role in unlocking the Beatles' willingness to experiment, write in new ways and pursue a multifaceted creative vision, regardless of public expectations or the progress of their peers. And of course the band's new explorations were firmly rooted in the studio, as this chasm opened up between the touring band they used to be and the kind of studio band they would become. And of course this abandonment of playing live, the band retreated amid a tangle of tape loops and overdubs. The use of the drug at this time had become quite excessive, especially John. Again, I refer you to Cynthia Lennon's book, which is a cracking read. You could feel the shift in their music had fundamentally changed, especially from Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. This is kind of what Baudelaire would consider a seismic shudder in the arts, as there's no doubt that this band had changed fundamentally, but it also changed the path of popular music from 1966 onwards. The Beatles expanded on their initial exploration, taking their second LSD trip a few months later while attending an afternoon party in Los Angeles. This trip would be one that provided the source of inspiration for John Lennon's song She Said, which was recorded for Revolver, of course. Lennon was inspired by actor Peter Fonda, who during the party told him on numerous occasions throughout the trip, "I know what it's like to be dead," which of course ended up being a lyric in the aforementioned number. McCartney decided to take LSD in 1965, and he did so with Tara Brown. Tara Brown was a young socialite whose death in December 1966 was chronicled in the wonderful A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper.
I read the news today, oh boy. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Law.
Some have pointed to McCartney's decision not to take LSD with the rest of the Beatles as symptomatic of the band drifting apart. There's no doubt that McCartney took LSD quite a few times after this experience, but I think it's fair to say he wasn't as enamoured with the drug as Lennon and Harrison were. Childhood nostalgia was a key feature of the psychedelic era, and the Beatles were enthusiastic flag bearers for this. For me, Sgt. Pepper and Piper at the Gates of Dawn are the most seminal moments of British psychedelia that saw a whole legion of bands writing about toy shops and teapots in one fell swoop. Even R&B prodigy Steve Winwood decamped to the countryside with his band to write songs about Berkshire poppies. Pepper provided a stark contrast to the early monochrome pop phase of the band, as they took us to a technicolor wonderland apparent in the music, the remembrance of things past, irreverent surrealism, sonic experimentation, and childhood and woozy Victoriana, and Lennon's introspection projected via tropes from children's literature, Victorian fairgrounds and circuses, as well as that innocent sense of wonderment. By April '66, the band had embarked on what would be the Revolver Sessions, and a startling metamorphosis had taken place with this band, gone with the folkier sort of Dylan textures of Rubber Soul, replaced with a kind of a psychedelic smudge of sound, biting guitars, horns, and who could forget that unearthly drone of Tomorrow Never Knows. Drug use had been referred to in other songs, but with Revolver it was a whole new ballpark, toying with the very fabric of recorded sound. McCartney said of Tomorrow Never Knows it was their only recording that chronicled the LSD experience. Speaking to Playboy magazine in 1984, he said, "It was a kind of Bible for all psychedelic freaks. That was an LSD song, probably the only one. And anyone doubting that Tomorrow Never Knows, even the lyric was in part lifted from Timothy Leary's Introduction to the Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead." And as regards Lennon's quite excessive use of LSD at this time, Pete Shotton weighs in his book. He saw acid as a godsend, a magical key to uncharted regions of his own imagination, and a potential cure for most of his psychological problems. It gave almost tangible form to his lifelong perception of the world as a surrealistic carnival, and it enabled him instantaneously, effortlessly, and without leaving his chair, to experience the semblance of mystical visions and even communion with God. However, Cynthia Lennon states that his use of LSD certainly contributed to the breakdown of their marriage. In fact, she said when John was tripping, it was like living with a stranger. I hated that, and I hated the fact that LSD was pulling him away from me. There's no doubt that LSD informed a lot of the imagery in the Beatles songs. McCartney said of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, "While we were talking about cellophane flowers and kaleidoscope eyes and grow so incredibly high, we were talking about drug experiences." There's no doubt about it. But it also navigated those surreal landscapes that the counterculture just loved so much, and particularly an interest in Lewis Carroll, for the obvious reasons. In fact, the lyrics to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds are actually drawn from the Wool and Water chapter of Through the Looking Glass. So the boat was left to drift downstream until it glided gently in among the waving rushes. But the song is also inspired by the languid closing acrostic poem that Carol wrote for Alice. In a wonderland they lie, dreaming as days go by, dreaming as the summers die, ever drifting down the stream, lingering in the golden gleam. Life, what is it but a dream? Interesting, Peter Blake said, as regards the Sgt. Pepper photo shoot, the photograph of the Beatles reveals 2 that were flying and 2 that were not. Anyway, let's think of some acid-inspired tunes by the Beatles. Number 5 is She Said, She Said. That biting guitar riff that just oozes a sense of trippiness. As I've said, this was inspired by an experience at a party that the band attended, and a conversation with Peter Fonda. Lennon said that we were on an acid trip and the sun was shining and the girls were dancing. The whole thing was just beautiful. This number is genuine psychedelic as well as pristine pop at its very, very best. Number 2 is Got to Get You Into My Life. This is a big, bold, brassy slab of American R&B. But there are those that feel it was actually about LSD, even though that Lennon said it was inspired by marijuana. Many see this as a kind of pain to his LSD trips with Tara Brown, in terms about taking a ride, seeing another kind of mind, not knowing what I'll find there. It seems to be speaking of a psychedelic experience rather than the languid wooziness of smoking marijuana. Number 3 is I Am the Walrus, which is definitely a psychedelic adventure. There's no doubt that Lennon was writing in the style of Bob Dylan. He was using sort of lyrics that were just thrown together that meant nothing, just to play with all those critics out there trying to pore over every sentiment expressed by the Beatles, looking for some deeper meaning. Lennon said the first line was written one weekend during an acid trip, and the second line was written during another acid trip the following weekend. Number 2 is Tomorrow Never Knows, that wonderful slice of mesmerising psychedelic psych rock from, of course, the Revolver album. Many consider this to be about an LSD experience. The sitar drone, the chanting, and the tape loops all brew together in this psychedelic stew. George Martin said that Lennon wanted his voice to sound like as if he was chanting or singing from the mountaintop. He wanted to sound like the Dalai Lama. And of course we get McCartney's speeded up laughter tracks throughout the song as well, which gives an edgy, unnerving feel. Number 1 is Day Tripper. This was the first single of 1965. I think it was coupled with We Can Work It Out. Lennon said that Day Tripper was definitely a drug song that critiqued those that wouldn't commit to an alternative lifestyle. In fact, he said, day trippers are people who go on a day trip, right? Usually on a ferry boat or something, but it was a kind of, you're just a kind of a weekend hippie. Do you get it? So there you are, that's my critique of how LSD fundamentally changed the Beatles. If you've enjoyed this video, please do click like, subscribe, and check that notification bell so you get notified of other uploads. Share this video, why not? Other than that, I just hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.